Welcome to Art and Ritual, and we're looking at the medieval period here from about 700 to about 1400 in the Common Era. So we've already talked about how art and architecture can reinforce notions of power, draw out specific religious or emotional responses from people who encounter them. And today I want to talk about art and architecture as a way of staging ritual or as a way of framing or understanding one's experience vis-a-vis a ritual. So art objects and architectural spaces can both play very important roles in all kinds of different events in human life. They can be solemn, funerary, joyous, celebratory, holy, secular. And yet, our experience of these events is necessarily shaped by the spaces that they occur in and by the objects that we use. And these objects can facilitate the experience, they can dramatize certain aspects of it, they can make it feel like something larger than life, they can connect us to the earth, etc. So there are a lot of ways that we can go about exploring the relationship between art and ritual. But I want you to remember this idea that these rituals are not fixed. And so the reactions between the events that are happening and the place in which they're happening and the objects that they're happening with are changeable. They change over time, they change from person to person, and they change through the course of the ritual. So we're kind of jumping all over the place today because you have a choice between chapter 26, monumental art in South and Southeast Asia, chapter 27, the dissemination of Buddhism in East Asian art, chapter 28, the art of the Byzantine Empire, and then chapter 30, art of the Americas. So we'll be looking specifically today at Angkor Wat in Cambodia, Buddhist practices that are used considerably broadly, but typically happening in Tibet. We will be looking in Italy at a church in Ravenna here. And then we'll be looking at sort of the Mayan existence here in Mesoamerica. So we'll begin with Angkor Wat. So Angkor Wat, which is the capital city of the Khmer dynasty, which comes to its full fruition in the 12th century. This is a city temple. And you can see that this is a tremendously dominant feature, right? This is a space that is towering over all of the other inhabitants and the other buildings here. And at its height, something like 750,000 people lived around this area. And the temple itself occupies 3/4 of a square mile. So this is even bigger than Vatican City. So the temple was built by the Khmer dynasty in order to show respect for not only the god kings, the Deva Rajas, who are ruling the Khmer dynasty, but also the Hindu god Vishnu. And this is the largest early Hindu temple. By commissioning temples, rulers are not only drawing a link between themselves and the deities that the temples are dedicated to, but they're also making this startling visual show of their own power, their own sacrality, their wealth, their status, etc. So in this particular location, the temple is actually evoking this sort of metaphysical mountain, which is known as Mount Meru. And there are other ones that exist in real life, but this is sort of a microcosm of the Hindu and Buddhist world. So this 5-pointed mountain exists in what's called the cosmic sea. And so in imagining that mountain in real place and time at Angkor Wat, there's sort of a window being opened to the otherworldly, right? So particularly in this temple, we can see that there are 5 peaks, 5 towers, and all around is this sort of idea of a moat that serves to commemorate the cosmic sea. So it's a space that's practical as well as already ritualized because it's connecting to this sort of mythical identity. The other thing that's important is that the way that Angkor Wat is built forces a certain type of interaction with the space. And so as soon as you get on this causeway, which you see here with these monks walking towards the entranceway, you're already being directed in a certain way in terms of your experience, right? You can't approach from any which way. You are on a particular track, which is designed to give you a certain view of the temple. And if we look at the floor plan from your textbook, you can see that the moat serves as the cosmic sea, and that we have these 5 towers here that represent the peaks of Mount Meru. Here's another depiction of it in a tanka, which is usually a painting on fabric used to sort of create these images. And we can see in both cases that we're sort of understanding the universe as depicted in this mountain, temple, ocean combination. And you'll see also that as you approach the central area of the sanctuary, and the sanctuary being the holiest part of a religious structure, you'll see that the various levels that you walk through get narrower and narrower and narrower. So as you're circumambulating, as you know, you're walking around in these hallways, these corridors, you're getting closer and closer to the Holy of the Holies, this central area. In the center also, there's a very steep staircase, which mimics the sort of ascent of Mount Meru. So you feel in some way that you're ritually climbing the mountain as you're going about your religious devotions. Now, we don't know exactly what Angkor Wat temple was used for. It's possible that it was also serving as sort of an administrative heart of the Khmer dynasty. But nevertheless, we know that these spaces are circumscribed with religious meaning, and that as you approach, you are being driven in and sort of constrained by a very particular, deliberate understanding and experience of the actual physical space. And if we look at this particular relief, we've got this low relief here on the left-hand side. This is part of a mythology about the triumph of good over evil. This is the churning of the Milk Sea. And it's part of a creation myth, seeking the elixir of life. But you can see that the way that it's sculpted is very undulating, and you have these figures in the back that seem to be almost echoing or evoking the dancers that would be actually dancing in this space. And so here in 2011, this particular ritual was reenacted. This particular dance style was reenacted by Angkor Wat dancers. And I want to remind you that as rituals are happening, people are carrying out activities that might be reflected in the art all around them. And so this gives special meaning, I think, to the connection between architecture and ritual. And since it's facing the west, the facade of Angkor Wat is actually towards the west, it is situated a certain way vis-a-vis the sunset, right? And so your experience of this space as sacred or as purposefully delineated and described comes alongside the sort of earthly changes that happen around it as the day progresses. So you're really being exposed to the space and the ritualistic aspects that happen within it in this very purposeful way by the architects. We move next to the practice of Buddhist sand mandalas. And a mandala is a circular, usually a circular image. This comes from the Sanskrit word for circle, which symbolically describes the universe. So just like Angkor Wat is taking this mythological Mount Meru and making it real, so too is the sand mandala, just describing and illustrating a particular version of the Buddhist world. So at the center is the most important part. And this is the place where we are actually representing Buddha's mind. And in this particular example, which does not correspond to this image, they're just examples, we can see that this is the Buddha of compassion represented by lotus flowers. So using an iconography that is known across Buddhism, we can depict certain aspects and certain interpretations within the mandala. And there are various kinds. Some are teaching mandalas, and this is a practice that students do as they're learning to kind of depict the world as they understand it, using different colors, different shapes, different lines, etc. We might also have a healing mandala, and which is you'll see in the video that I assigned you. And these are devoted to different purposes. And so they need to combine different iconographic elements, including colors. So these are made with sand, which means that this is a very painstaking activity. It seems that at minimum, a good sized mandala would take about 30 to 40 hours of labor, with several Buddhist monks contributing. And so the act of creating this is ritualized. Everybody has their part, everybody is skilled in a certain way, and they're sharing their skills and putting them together for the creation of this sort of collective, artistic, ritualized production, which nevertheless has these deep spiritual meanings. A chakpur is the little, usually copper kind of funnel that was used, and you'll see that it has ridges on it. And these ridges can be tapped, as you see here on the right-hand side, to elicit just a little bit of sand, right? So the person who is very skilled at creating the mandala, and people would learn for something like 5 years, monks would learn for about 5 years to be able to do this with appropriate delicacy and care. You would tap very, very gently on these ridges, and the people who use them obviously know sort of the ebb and flow of how the sand is working, but you just have this tremendous amount of control from the way that this instrument is made. Here are a couple of more examples of various mandalas, and you can see that they vary tremendously in the types of colors used, the hues, the combinations, what images are juxtaposed with what others, and these can basically be read. So not only is the ritual of reading and sort of wandering through this in a mental way, but the ritual of creating this is deeply ingrained, especially in Tibetan Buddhism. When the mandala is done, after all of those hours of labor, as a symbol of the finiteness of this life, as a symbol of sort of the whisking away of life, it's destroyed ritually. And so here we have, we can see a member of the Yellow Cap sect is actually using a paintbrush to, in a very specific way, undo all of these separate colors that have been laid out with such care. And so again, the ritual of creating it is mirrored by the ritual of destroying it. We move next to Italy to look at the Church of San Vitale, dedicated to the Saint Vitalis, who was a sort of vague martyr in the olden days. We don't really have any true historical information about him. Nevertheless, this church is dedicated to him. And you'll see that it is built in a particular way that is different from the churches that we'll be looking at next week in medieval art. So ordinarily, a church is built on the ancient Roman structure of a basilica, which were their law courts, with a long central, what we call nave, this hallway down the middle. Here, by contrast, we have an octagonal shape. It has 8 sides with a central dome, and then a number of radiating chapels off of it, and an apse. So this is actually the east down here. Here's the apse on the outside. So when you enter on this image, you'll note that there's one sort of central building, and then the part in the middle actually projects higher. So that's where the dome is, and we'll be looking at some of the artwork inside in a moment. On the outside, just as a sort of teaser for next week, these are flying buttresses. These are buttresses that will push against the wall to enable the building to be taller, to have windows that are more open, and we'll see this increasingly in the Gothic style. So you'll see also inside that there are 2 tiers. We have the bottom floor, and then up here we have the gallery. So this would be actually where the women would be separated from the men. The church was built in the 6th century, and inside it commemorates the rule of the Emperor Justinian, who was one of the best and most powerful and most effective and geographically expansive emperors of the Byzantine Empire. And so the Byzantine Empire refers to the eastern portion of the former Roman Empire, that huge, large stretch. So inside, Ravenna is known, or this Church of San Vitale, I should say, is known for its mosaics. So you'll remember that a mosaic is comprised of teeny tiny tesserae, usually made of glass, and in this case, absolutely stunning amounts of gold. These are perhaps the best early mosaics in Christian architecture. On the left, you'll see the Christ as Pantocrator. This is Christ as the ruler of all. And this is Christ in his biggest authority, his most central power. We can see that he's sitting on a blue orb, which represents the entire cosmos. He also is quite youthful, right? Normally later on, he's depicted with a beard, but here he's got a fresh shaven face, and he's draped in purple, which is the royal and godly color because it was so expensive. And you'll note also that Theodora on the right is also purple. There are 2 angels on either side of Christ sitting on this orb, and he's holding out with his right hand the crown of martyrdom to Saint Vitalis, who's here. And then in this hand on his left, he's actually holding the 7-sealed scroll, which will be opened at the end of days to usher in the apocalypse. So it's quite a dark message happening up here in this area, which is called the conch or the conch over the apse. Now the apse, as we saw in the previous picture, is that little circular area to the east. This is where the altar is placed inside the apse. And in later structures, we'll see that the apse is in the east so that the sort of crisp morning light falls on it. And this is related also to the idea of Jesus as the Son of God. And we have this sort of warning that the end of days will come, so you all better behave now. Over here, we have Ecclesius, who is the patron of this church. He paid for it, and he's holding a little model of it, handing it to this angel here. And you'll see too, actually, that both of these figures are labeled actually in Latin. And then we have the four rivers of paradise flowing out underneath. But just take a look at this sheer amount of decorative element. Every single inch of this space is covered. On the right, we have one of a pair of mosaics showing Justinian and Theodora, his empress. And again, we have Theodora in this extremely stately garb. She's got purple on, just like Jesus. And there actually is a little depiction of the three wise men who came to bring Jesus gifts on the hem of her robe. And she has eunuchs, who are castrated men who serve in her court. And on this side, ladies in waiting. And just feast your eyes on this fabric. The way it's depicted in this mosaic is absolutely gorgeous. And again, the sense of architectural space, but we note from the fountain that she's actually outside the sanctuary. So what's interesting about this is that women were not allowed in the apse area. So every time I go to the cloisters and I do a tour at the apse, I like to go walk around the apse because we're allowed to be there now. But she was not. And so she and her ladies would sit up in the gallery during all of the ritual events of the Mass. However, Theodora had her mosaic on the south side of the apse. So she's actually in the space that is barred to women in this kind of really awesome statement of authority and power. Stunning. So here we have the larger sort of iconographical program. And so there's scenes from the Old Testament here on the sides. Here's the top of the Christ, the Pantocrator image that we just looked at. And if you look upwards at it, you can see in all of these little archways, extreme decoration of every variety, these beautiful colors, and especially the gilding. So there are a number of windows that would have enabled the daylight to come in and bounce off all of this gold, and it would flicker with the candlelight, etc. So the space is really serving as sort of like a jewelry box for the Christian celebration of Mass. And also here we have another image of Jesus in a rainbow mandorla with 14 individuals, including the 12 apostles, all up and down the sides here. So think about the impact that this would have had on people coming to church. And finally, we're moving to Mesoamerica to look at Mayan ritual. And one of the things that was central to the relationship between Mayans and their deities was what we call auto-sacrifice. And this is not necessarily sacrificing oneself, but it is of sort of a sacrificial variety of bloodletting. And so what you see here on lintel 24, which is in the British Museum now, and a lintel is a horizontal panel or a horizontal support that's over a door or some other kind of opening like that. You probably have some in your house over your doorways. The lintel here is depicting this act of auto-sacrifice or bloodletting. And so we have identified by the Mayan hieroglyphics in the image, we have a specific king and queen here. And the king is holding this torch and the queen here is performing the blood sacrifice. So if we look closer, and if you wanted to search this on the British Museum website, you can get very, very close. They have excellent high resolution images. We can see that the queen's tongue is out and she's drawing this cord with these barbs made of obsidian, which is very hard black volcanic material, through her tongue to start this bloodletting process. She's also wearing this very elaborate headdress, which you can see extends all the way up. And then a lot of jewelry and sort of armor style, decorative, ceremonial, ritualistic pieces of attire. You can see a better example of the flame here. And then also likewise, we can tell that this is a ritual because of how detailed the clothing is, how specific the accoutrement of the ritual are, right? We need the torch, we need this rope, which you can see closer here with these little obsidian barbs. And we can see also all of the decoration that comes along with this very solemn effect, this very solemn event. And this is a wicker basket or woven basket into which her blood is presumably trickling for this ritualistic activity. We also see tremendous ritual in the games played at the ball courts in Mayan and also Aztec complexes. And so here on the left in Copan, which is in modern day Honduras, we can actually see the whole court from above and just note these little tlactli, I can't say it well. These are the little holes that are sort of framing the game. And it's not exactly clear how these games were played, like whether the ball had to go through the hole or whether there's something slightly more abstracted about the game. And also there's still some debate about whether or not players would be sacrificed after. But you can see that what's important about this is rather than the kind of private places of the sanctuaries that we looked at, right, where people are restricted from access, especially in the case of women in the early Christian churches like San Vitale, this is actually a public space. So not only are you all watching this game, but you're seeing each other. And so there's something I think important about self-awareness and community building that's happening in spaces like this around these ball game rituals. And I included this image with the tour group just so you can see how phenomenally enormous the ball field at Chichen Itza in modern day Mexico is. And then on the right here, we have another relief, and again, sort of low relief that's carved into the area around the ball court where we see one of the players be decapitated. And this is, you can see the little head right here. This is one of the reasons why it's been suggested that there was human sacrifice associated with this game known as Poctapok. So likewise, again, all of the decorative elements tell us that this was, you know, something that you dress specifically for. You bring the respect of a certain traditional outfit to the ritual to complete it. And think about that today when we have rituals, what do we wear, right? How do we mark these occasions? Okay, so here are a couple of vocabulary terms. I believe we got to all of them. And by staging, I just mean kind of the way in which the space serves as a backdrop, but also a shaper of these events that sometimes take on drama, that sometimes are viewed as microcosms of other events in our daily lives. Good luck on your quiz.